For us to go, we're live. I agree. Like it's a very tricky position because on one side, you want to rejoice and seeing those videos of the Palestinians finally having peace, not having bombs drop on them on a daily basis. And you seeing those prisoners on both sides, hostages and prisoners being released on both sides. You want to rejoice, but it's also very difficult knowing the circumstances and all the hurdles that are on the way. I think we share that concern, especially now with the developments that, for the audience, you don't understand how difficult peace will be, and it seems Max agrees with that point, and I'll let you elaborate. But we're already seeing issues, like for example, Israel now, and I find that to be just ridiculous. Israel now is halved the amount of aid they're meant to send to Gaza, which is struggling for aid. So aid, food, and water for the entire population has been halved starting tomorrow, 300 trucks instead of 600. The reason is because Hamas has not released the bodies of the dead hostages. They haven't handed those over to Israel. Take into consideration, Gaza has just been pummeled, destroyed, with bodies under the rubble, which is not the best start to this peace deal, but we'd love to get your thoughts, Max.
Well, yeah, there's no reason to expect, after shattering so many ceasefires, that Israel, with all of the preponderance of power on its side, stretching to Washington, will abide by this one. It's trying to simply set new terms and also outline an advantageous environment for the next round of conflict, which is inevitable. So as you said, Israel is continuing to collectively punish the suffering population of Gaza in violation of the deal. They're only allowing UN aid, no aid from like private charities only about 150 trucks a day, which is just a minuscule amount of aid to address what has been reported as famine. And
I thought it was 300. It's 150, even lower.
They've halved it from 300 from what I've seen, but 300 is still very low. And they're making sure that Rafah remains closed, which was part of the deal. Would be that the Rafah crossing would actually open. That's what the Egyptian authorities agreed to as well. And the reason is that they haven't gotten the remains of dead captives. But Hamas, I think, with some credibility, has said, because I mean, there's no instance in which Hamas agreed to a deal since October 7th and did not return the captives it said it would return. Maybe Israel didn't like the way they went about it, but they did it. And they say that they can't return them because 83% of the Gaza Strip is destroyed. And so it's difficult for them to reach certain places. And that sounds pretty credible to me. So Israel's violating the deal. In addition, they've opened fire and launched airstrikes on families trying to reach their homes in Shujaiya, which is a neighborhood east of Gaza City that's near the 53% line. So Israel still controls 53% of the Gaza Strip. Firing orders have gone out to Israeli soldiers, which have been reported in Hebrew media. And some of them said, wait till we get all of our captives back, and then we can open fire more freely. But until then, open fire near people trying to reach near the 53% line to prevent them from going back. So Gaza's still occupied, and that speaks to the larger issue. I mean, we're talking details now, but the larger issue is that this is not a peace deal because it doesn't address the underlying issues of conflict, which have never been addressed. And peace has always traditionally, I mean, I would say since at least Madrid in 1991, peace has been used as cover for Israel to entrench its occupation. And that's what I'm seeing now.
So
it's more
in
of
terms
a
of your
pause.
point that, similar to the Iran-Israel pause. On the point of the hostages being difficult, the dead hostages being difficult to be retrieved by Hamas, the International Red Cross said the same thing. The International Committee of the Red Cross, they said finding the dead is even harder than freeing the living, and calling it a massive challenge. And I think they said it will take weeks. So it's not only Hamas is saying this, but you've got the International Red Cross, and it makes sense. Now, according to the agreement, you can say, if you want to go by the book, according to the agreement, Israel saying Hamas has breached the agreement because they did not return the dead hostages within those 3 days. But I think there's something called this in the spirit of the agreement. If something's just might need to take longer, it's just not the right thing. If your goal is to reach peace, to freeze aid, and that goes back to collective punishment. Now, in terms of your point about Palestinians being shot near that border, where that buffer, where Gaza, where IDF pulled out to, do we have any information who those people were? Were they Hamas members? Were they members of Hamas trying to attack IDF forces? Because you have to also understand that Hamas is struggling to even regain control of Gaza, and there's other factions within Hamas. They might not be as willing as, let's say, the negotiators or the commanders for a peace deal, and they want to continue fighting because they hate Israel or they lost a loved one. So could it be former members of Hamas acting alone, or maybe a small group of Hamas members acting alone without the approval of the main commanders?
No, I mean, it would be insane for them to do that. Al-Qassam Brigade rarely has anyone going rogue. This is just families trying to get back to their homes, to their belongings. And this is something we've seen again and again when people have tried to cross the Netzarim corridor, which the so-called corridor of death, which was filled with Israeli military installations. People would just be shot after they would be forced out of northern Gaza to the south to like Mawasi, the so-called safe zone. They'd be coming back throughout the past 2 years after various pauses or when they thought they were safe to get back to their homes, and then they would be shot. There's video of families waving white flags on the beach trying to head across Netzarim and being droned. Anyone can find this footage. So that's what I think happened. I don't think Israel's even hiding that fact right now. They're trying to prevent anyone from returning to homes anywhere near the 53% line, which is the line that was actually de facto established in 2014 when Israel began destroying these frontier regions, or the neighborhoods east of Gaza City, east of Khan Yunis. They destroyed Hosea, and they destroyed all of the areas around Rafah. Rafah is now completely off limits and is totally destroyed. So it's an occupation. And just looking more broadly at the overall picture, these people are invisible who are suffering in Gaza. The Palestinian prisoners, I would call many of them hostages. 1,700 of them were basically just kidnapped on account of them being between the ages of 18 and 55. Many of them were doctors, journalists, professionals, kidnapped by the Israeli military, taken to torture centers. They're now being returned, some of them without limbs. They were amputated after torture in torture camps like Sde Timan. They're invisible. We're not hearing their names at all. And this entire deal is being treated as this gigantic deliverance because the only lives that matter here are those of the Jewish captives in the Gaza Strip, including those who were active duty soldiers enforcing the occupation on October 7th. Just look at like the headline of any British tabloid: "The long, painful nightmare is over," according to the Daily Express. Well, it's not over for people in Gaza. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has named all of the Israeli captives, but none of the Palestinian captives are named. Antonio Guterres, the UN General Secretary, same thing. He has named the Israeli captives. He said it's great the Israeli hostages are out. Says nothing about the Palestinians. And so that, to me, sets the stage for another dangerous confrontation, because the so-called international community seems to have no desire to address or to apply leverage and pressure to address the underlying reasons for this conflict in the first place. If anything, they're just trying to, as we saw from Keir Starmer, get on Trump's good side and wind up kind of getting humiliated publicly because they're only seeking influence with Washington.
I want to go back to what Hamas has done, though, because I've been pretty disappointed by their response after the peace deal as well. So there's been reports hours after signing the peace deal, Hamas has lined up. There's a video of them lining up 8 blindfolded men. Not sure if you've seen it. They call them collaborators with Israel. They lined them up, beat them, and then shot them in front of a cheering crowd. And that goes to another point that Hamas is trying to regain control of Gaza. They don't have the level of control some people make it out to be. There's various clans now, some supported by Israel, and I know this is a common strategy for various militaries to do, including the IDF. The Abu Shabab clan, which is based mainly in Rafah, they've been funded by Israel. They've had clashes with Hamas, from what I heard. I think they're the ones that killed, correct me if I'm wrong, they killed the Gaza influencer. Poor guy, he's been covering the war the whole time and then got killed after a peace deal was reached a couple of days ago.
Salah al-Jafrawi.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the Al-Shabaab clan, Abu Shabab clan. Then in the Gaza City, you've got the Dogsham clan, which was once allied with Hamas, now clashing with Hamas. And you've got in Khan Yunis, the Al-Mujahida clan, which is also in a dispute with Hamas. And they've had raids together. So does that mean Hamas... Well, the peace deal includes Hamas not having control, but Hamas already lost control. And could that lead to something even more sinister? Something that some may argue works in Israel's favor, keeping Hamas weak or keeping Gaza weak, but that's having a civil conflict or civil war in Gaza.
Well, I hate to get too bogged down in details just for the benefit of the audience, but it's important to mention that Yasser Abu Shabab doesn't really represent the Abu Shabab clan. His family, who are Bedouins and have been involved in the trafficking business, have actually denounced him and consider him to be a rogue figure. He's been involved in drug trafficking. He's worked with ISIS elements in the Sinai, and he was recruited by Israeli intelligence to spread disorder and destabilize Gaza in their vain and failed bid to dislodge Hamas. And somehow he wound up getting an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I could never get an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I'm anathema to them. But someone who's a drug trafficker hanging out with ISIS fanatics, he's okay because he's advancing Israel's objectives the same way that Abu Muhammad Jalani advanced the West's objectives under the banner of Jabhat al-Nusra, aka Al-Qaeda, in Syria, and received backing from at least NATO through Turkey. And now he's in power as Ahmed al-Sharaa. That was sort of the fantasy for Israel. It's what they did in Lebanon during the Lebanese civil war when they invaded. They, backing Bashir Gemayel and Maronite warlords. They've tried to back various very unsavory elements in Gaza to destabilize Hamas. And what they did throughout the past year and a half or so is loot the aid coming in and then resell it back to the population at inflated prices in order to make money. They were wholly, completely...
That's the Abu Shabab clan, yes?
The Abu Shabab clan, but also some of these other families. There are two families within the Dagmash clan that have been involved in gunfights with Hamas, and they're notorious in Gaza for banditry, trafficking, and running the black market. And so Hamas is trying to restore order, and the reason people are cheering is because now the aid is actually reaching them and the black market is being harmed. It's not entirely out of ideological support for Hamas or Islamism. It's also important to mention that during the fighting since October 7th, Hamas has been joined in the field by PFLP, which is an ostensibly Marxist faction, by DFLP, which is another sort of left-oriented faction, secular, and by the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades of Fatah, which is traditionally their rival. They always have fought united. So this isn't a factional dispute. This is more about corrupt families and individuals.
Do you worry, though, Max, that, I understand you think Israel wants the war to continue, and I understand your argument there, but do you also worry that Hamas wants the same? Like, for them to round up people, start shooting them with people cheering them being shot publicly on the street. And then you've got some of the leaders as well talking about not disarming. Osama Hamdan said, Hamas will not hand over its weapons before the liberation and establishment of the state. And he's referring there for a one-state solution, a Palestinian state without an Israeli state. That's according to Osama Hamdan. Khalil al-Hayya said something, he said, announced that a countdown to renewed attacks has begun, citing Hamas's rearmament and recruitment efforts. So you've got members of Hamas, including Hamas leaders, that seem to also not want peace. So for me, it seems that both sides, not Palestinians want peace, but the soldiers on both sides, the Israeli side, I'm pretty critical of the aid is one example. And on the Hamas side, both don't seem to want peace.
Well, you should invite Osama Hamdan on. He speaks good English, and I'm sure he would join you.
We have.
And I've interviewed him. I'm not here to speak on behalf of Hamas, but it's pretty clear to me their main objective right now is to restore order and consolidate their control, which is a massive defeat for Netanyahu, who had promised to his narrow but very fervent constituency total victory. You saw like Likud fanatics in Israel wearing total victory hats modeled after Make America Great Again hats. This was Netanyahu's mantra, and he has not achieved total victory. Hamas is still fully in control. And for them, it's about just holding territory in what remains of the walled off prison, the de facto biometric drone enforced Indian reservation that's been granted to them after their grandparents were thrown off their land in what is today Israel. They're representing a population of refugees, orphans, amputees, people who are essentially now Holocaust survivors. And their red line is, we will not give up our weapons, because if we do, we will wind up, I mean, this is the reality. They will wind up like the West Bank, where Mahmoud Abbas collaborates and coordinates directly with the Israeli military to arrest Palestinian resistance members. And how has he been rewarded? Israel's de facto annexing the West Bank. It's practically impossible to travel between Ramallah and Nablus because of the amount of settler terror and military checkpoints. And so Hamas's claim to fame, the reason why Palestinians support it outside of the religious or ideological reasons, is because they forced the Israeli settlers and military out of the physical territory on the ground of the Gaza Strip at the end of the Second Intifada. So why would they give up their weapons? I mean, this whole talking point from Israeli propagandists that all they have to do is put down their weapons and surrender and let everyone go, and then there will be peace, has been disproven by Israel's conduct everywhere from the West Bank to Syria, which basically gave up its fight. And how are they being rewarded? They're being bombed every day by the Israeli Air Force.
Okay. I understand the argument that you cannot have a state, you cannot have freedom without being able to defend your state, without having an army. And I'm also critical of what's happening in the West Bank, Max. But where would you rather be right now, in the West Bank or in Gaza, which is 80-90% destroyed? So the argument that we will fight Israel and commit, atrocities like October 7th, or continue fighting today, is only going to make matters worse. There's nothing left in Gaza. What is the point of Hamas continuing to hold arms? The argument makes sense, but the results speak for themselves. Right or wrong?
I don't agree that the results speak for themselves.
But there's nothing left.
What is the point of Hezbollah trying to hold on to their arms? Israel will take the territory all the way up to the Litani River if they put down their arms.
Jordan and Egypt, they've normalized relations with Israel. I've always made that argument. They've received a lot of aid from the US, and they've got, normalized relations. They've business as usual, no war with Israel. Their economy is doing okay. And if you compare that to the other two countries bordering Israel, Lebanon and Palestinian territory, Palestine, it's a whole different story. Both have suffered wars and wars because of Israel.
They've suffered wars and wars. You're talking about Palestinians versus the so-called Arabs. I mean, what is Jordan? It is essentially a backwater granted to the Hashemites, who were kicked out of Iraq because they were hated as British colonial collaborators, now ruled by a half British blue-eyed king with a British accent. And they were never supportive of the Palestinians in any principled way. Then you have Egypt, which has been reduced to a junior partner. It was formerly the power of the Arab world, culturally, politically, militarily, and they have been reduced to basically a neo-colony of the IMF, subject to bread riots every few years. And the Gulf states are now in charge of the Arab world. So Palestinians have been left to fend for themselves. That's why October 7th happened partly because of the looming Abraham Accords, which the UAE were pushing, and Saudi Arabia was due to join. And the objective was, to make peace over the heads of Palestinians. That's everything that we see Trump doing is about making peace without the Palestinians involved, to put the Palestinians in the icebox, because who controls Trump? As Donald Trump acknowledged in his speech in the Knesset, no one had visited him more in the White House than Miriam and Sheldon Adelson. They contributed enormous amounts to him. And when he asked Miriam Adelson which country she cared about more, Israel or the US, she basically indicated it was Israel. I mean, you're not supposed to say that, but that's what this is all about. So naturally, the Palestinians are going to be rebellious. They're not going to want to give up their weapons, because it means giving up their entire national identity, their entire national struggle, and being relegated to walled off refugee camps, or one could even say concentration camps, forever, while the rest of the Arab world just seeks to get in on the Trumpian program. That's the reason why this is happening. That's my core argument for this discussion, is that nothing that has taken place, while I'm really relieved to see at least a pause to the killing, none of this addresses the core issue. And you mentioned something earlier, Mario, that Hamas wants a one-state solution. I'm not even sure if that's the case, because Hamas did verbally accept the Arab peace proposal put forward, actually by Saudi Arabia in 2002. They called for a 20-year hudna with Israel, and they said that they would accept a state along 1967 borders. And how were they treated? How did Israel respond? They put Gaza under siege and began the process of destroying Gaza to the point where it is today. So I don't think there's no, I mean, it's not that there's no Palestinian partner. It's that we've learned the lesson that the world has seen, most people in the world outside of the pro-Israel fringe, is that Israel only understands force.
Yeah. But then what's going to happen with Gaza if you've got Hamas not disarming? The peace deal's dead, because that's part of phase 3, I think, that Hamas has to disarm. That's one of the main conditions that Israel has, probably the most important condition after the release of the hostages. If Hamas does not agree to disarm and hand over their weapons, maybe to the new technocratic government, Palestinian government, then you've just got an endless war that will obviously not work in Palestine's favor. It will not help for a two-state solution. It will not help the Palestinians in Gaza to finally to live a normal life again. I just don't see it. If Hamas does not disarm, there's no possibility to be optimistic about the future.
It's remarkable if you think about it, what Hamas actually was able to achieve against 3 nuclear powers. It's still holding control of part of Gaza, and therefore Gaza is still under Palestinian control. And so you ask, what will happen to Gaza if Hamas doesn't?
What control? What control? No electricity, no water, no food, no business, no hospitals.
Hamas is, let me make my point and then I'll get to that.
Please, yeah.
Because you asked what would happen what will happen to Gaza if Hamas doesn't put down their arms. I think the question is, what would have happened to Gaza if they had been routed and defeated completely? And that plan was already put forward. So we already kind of know what the day after plan that Trump was advancing was. And it was to put Tony Blair, war criminal who contributed to the decimation of Iraqi society, in which 1 million Iraqis were killed, in control of a transitional authority in Gaza, which would have been substantially guided by techno-feudalist overlords from the West, including Larry Ellison, who's contributed $300 million to the Tony Blair Institute. And this plan, going down into the base of the plan, called for actually some form of biometric concentration camps in which, the irredeemable elements would be purged. The families would be then pushed to involuntarily migrate by being given a digital token in exchange for their homes. Then they'd be subsidized to live somewhere else. It could have actually led to a conflict with Egypt, because naturally they'd be pushed into the Sinai, which Israel previously occupied. So the alternative was a neo-colonial techno-dystopia. And now you have a kind of dystopian moonscape that is still under Palestinian control, with Palestinian flags over the city, in which there's no Tony Blair, and Hamas does control municipal functions. There will be some rebuilding process. I think countries like Turkey and Qatar will play a role there. Egypt is emerging as more of a player than it was previously. And they have flouted, it's not just Israeli plans, it's Emirati and Saudi plans to completely remove Hamas because of the threat Hamas and the idea of the Muslim Brotherhood present in their own societies as sort of democratic Islam, going to the ballot box versus monarchy. So that plan has been at least tabled for now. And where do they go now? Well, the Palestinian struggle continues. The global rebellion against Israeli domination and Israeli hegemony continues to grow. And these are all, in a way, victories that Hamas achieved amid horrendous human suffering. And I think I'm trying to be objective here, but this is something I think very few people consider. The question was, is Gaza going to be controlled by Palestinians, or is it going to be controlled by the same people who are like looting our own societies here in the West as they make a run on Gaza's oil fields, vast oil riches on the Mediterranean? So that's the point I wanted to make.
I see your concern with the alternative, Max. Many concerns with the alternative. You know, Palestine should be run by Palestinians. They should have the right to self-defense like any other country. They should be a sovereign country, control their borders, have an airport. So we agree there. But we both also understand this is not feasible, especially if Hamas maintain their weapons. This is what my concern is that the alternative, the cost of freedom right now, we've seen it in the last 2 years. The cost of maintaining that freedom and deciding what to do with their own arms comes at a pretty hefty cost. The alternative, and let's try to be a bit more optimistic. Trump has put his name behind this deal. He said there will be peace. Peace will be made. He talked about how this is a war that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and he's managed to solve it. He's also forced Netanyahu to apologize to the Qatari leader, which is, I don't think I've seen an American president do that before. If you disagree, I'd love you to jump in. But isn't there also room to be optimistic that maybe this peace deal, you've got Kushner talking about the French Riviera type investments in the region. I know that's way too optimistic, but I'm saying that maybe there is a path to prosperity. Maybe there is a path where step by step, I don't know about a two-state solution. That seems very difficult, at least for the next few years. But at least there'll be some resemblance of normality for Palestinians under some sort of weird structure that we don't have in many other countries, if any.
I mean, the French Riviera plan is a Jewish supremacist fantasy that I just detailed for external control and looting of Gaza, in which Palestinians will be servants, serfs. They will be working in sweatshops, as a McKinsey document produced under the watch of Tony Blair that I revealed at through my own reporting back in 2012. That's the plan. The Boston Consulting Group produced plans for the so-called Gaza Riviera. And at the end, there are Emirati wealthy emirs and figures from Saudi Arabia meeting with Elon Musk-like figure at a Tesla-like plant where Palestinians from Gaza will provide the low-cost labor. That's the future for them that's being proposed by Jared Kushner, who has invested in a company that is involved in proposals to build Jews-only real estate on the coast of Gaza. So this is not someone who Palestinians
Jews-only real estate?
Yeah, like seafront real estate in Gaza.
Okay,
I would assume it would be something that Israelis would live in, and they're not really planning on living alongside Palestinians in Gaza. The religious nationalist camp in Israel, which has a substantial voice in Netanyahu's coalition, has called for resettling northern Gaza. This is their plan. So I think all these plans have been put forward without any input from Palestinians. In fact, when Tony Blair and his International Transitional Authority named figures who would govern in their fantasy world, very few Palestinians were even named. So it's a neo-colonial plan, and Palestinians who have any dignity will not accept it. I know there's some who've been bought off and support some kind of collaboration, but that's not where Palestinians who've been fighting for freedom for almost a century are going to be, from my perspective. And it's sort of laughable to talk about it after what we've seen Donald Trump do for, especially in his second term, where again and again, he has been one of the most malleable vehicles for Israeli influence, down to his speech in the Knesset, where he was sort of wryly, almost roasting Miriam Adelson, but at the same time hailing her for contributing part of her 60 billion to his political fortune, and on the condition that he support Israel. He said almost explicitly that he moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because the Adelsons basically bribed him to do it. I mean, that's wild. And moving the embassy to Jerusalem is such a provocation to what was supposed to be the future capital of a Palestinian state, while you have these fanatics like Itamar Ben-Gvir trying to take over the Al-Aqsa compound and turn it into the third temple, something that directly inspired the October 7th attacks, which were called Al-Aqsa Flood, in response to these provocations. So Donald Trump, it's up to Donald Trump to enforce the deal to get to phase 2. Will Donald Trump be able to sideline all of these billionaires who are paying him, Mike Huckabee and Jared Kushner and David Friedman and all the Israel firsters in his administration, and actually exert leverage on Israel, something Joe Biden refused to do? I mean, to Trump's credit, he actually made the phone call that got to some version of a ceasefire. Biden did nothing. But I don't believe Donald Trump has it in him to exert the leverage to start addressing the real sources of this conflict, which are occupation and colonization. Then you have to start sanctioning Israel. And that starts with
we know that won't happen. Last question,
no, we
Max.
don't.
Mario, you think it could happen?
Mario, that will happen. That will happen.
Wow. Okay. Max, always a pleasure.
We're going through a change here in the United States.
We are true. The new generation is very different to the older generation, but the new generation still has many years before garnering enough influence. Maybe in the ballot boxes, they're starting to get more and more influence. But we'll see. It's going to be enough.
Can I ask you a question? Just something I was wondering. It's kind of it's on the general topic, but because I know you're friendly with Elon Musk, and Benjamin Netanyahu, in an meeting with influencers outside the UN, he said that we were buying TikTok, basically and he's referring to like his pals,
Larry
like Ellison and so on. And then he said Elon Musk is a friend, and we have to kind of take control of Twitter X. Have you seen, since he said that, have you seen any change in the Twitter algorithm to make it more pro-Israel? Or, I mean, do you think there is any pressure there based on what you know?
No, I think I don't expect there to be pressure. I'm pretty worried about TikTok, but our content, you were talking earlier about the prisoners and hostages being released. So we posted content on both sides, Palestinian prisoners or hostages being released and Israeli ones as well. And both got a lot of reach. I interview people like yourself and Jonathan Conricus as well, opposing views, and they get a lot of reach. Your videos get a lot of reach. So no, the algorithm has been, at least in my experience, hasn't changed much at all. And I hope it continues. I feel Telegram, Rumble, and X are like the last 3 platforms that are standing up for free speech. How's your experience been?
Well, I mean, my experience had been terrible before Elon bought X, and I have pretty strong criticisms of Elon and his activities, but it does feel like one of the few remaining semi-free platforms. So I would hate to see the algorithm changed under pressure from the outside. And
I don't expect it to. Fingers crossed, but I don't expect it to. And I know that one I'm very worried about, but I also hope, I tend to be an optimist, that we don't see that happen in TikTok, but it doesn't look like it's. Some people are saying it's already happening.
It's definitely happening there. But thanks a lot, Mario, and
Thank you,
thanks
Max.
for continuing to host these conversations with people on both sides. It's something we don't get in U.S. corporate media.
I appreciate you always coming on. Thank you, Max. Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot.